everybody. We're live now, Core Devs. Can anyone just say something so I can make sure the input is working well on the stream?
Hey, Tim, can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, great. So if there's any issues with YouTube, Lane, please jump in. Otherwise, I'm hoping this is all working.
Cool. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on it.
Cool, great. Okay, so I'll post the agenda in our chat here. Have a bunch of things to go over today. I think the main thing we wanted to resolve is basically what EIPs go in Istanbul. Last call, we got to a nearly final resolution on a lot of them, so hopefully we can accomplish that today. Literally right before this call, James Hancock updated the Istanbul reference EIP, so I'll post that in the chat as well here. And so far, we really only have 4 EIPs that have been properly accepted, 1108, 1702, 2024, 2028. There's a couple that have been rejected on the last call. James said to have a look at that and then ping him if there's anything that seems odd here, because he can't make the call today. And then, yeah, I think the first thing is just to go over these EIPs that we talked about last week that we didn't get a final resolution on. The first one of which was 1344. Does anyone want to chime in on that?
Well, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm championing 1344. From what I can tell, there isn't a whole lot of contention about it going in. There's some talk about implementation details behind it, and I'm not quite sure how much needs to be captured in the EIP at this point, or how much is actually just implementation details that we discussed.
Sorry. So I guess with the core, sorry, with the chain ID EIP, we're talking about that one. I guess this is the simplified one. So the previous, the more complicated ones were rejected, and then the question is whether this can go in.
Yeah, so it's the one that has the opcode. Opcode returns the chain ID. There was some discussion of whether the chain ID comes from the field that's in the transaction, or if we make like a field that's inside the client and provided by the client. So there's a little trade-off there, but I don't think anyone's too against it actually going in.
Yeah, looks good to me. Probably, I would say that it's safer to take the chain ID that's within the chain and not the transaction, because I think Homestead transactions are still valid which don't have a chain ID. So that might be a bit of a surprise if your smart contract all of a sudden can receive different chain IDs on the same chain.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, and I think there was another EIP about adding it to JSON RPC, so it'd even make more sense in that case to just have a client provided number.
Yep, I mean, seems pretty obvious to me.
Does anyone have any objections to 1344, or do we agree it's accepted for Istanbul?
Just to clarify, it means that the chain ID opcode is entirely decoupled from the transaction, and the rules for accepting the transaction is outside of this scope.
Yeah, so all it says is that there's an opcode. When you call it, it returns a number. We don't know what the number is, but it returns a number. And the implementation detail is, does it come from transaction? Does it come from somewhere inside the client? Sounds like it's safer, and just generally, I think more people are on board with the client just providing a number, and that number is the same one that transactions would get rejected if they don't have that number. There was a question on whether, like, we want to go deeper maybe inside a different EIP about actually rejecting transactions that don't have that number at some point, so we don't run into this situation. But there's so many ways to jump down the rabbit hole on this one. I think just considering it a number that is provided by an opco is it.
I guess the last clarification, there was some discussion what would happen if there's no chain ID in the transaction. Then there were different proposals that, what would be the value return, but all of these issues are a non-issue if the value comes from the client and not from the transaction.
That is correct, yes.
So Alex, just to be clear, does this address your concerns?
I just wanted to clarify it to myself and maybe to others on the call. It sounds reasonable to me.
Cool. So do we have consensus that this is accepted? Does anyone disagree? Okay, so 1344 will be part of Istanbul. Next one on the list was the whole set of 1283/1706/2200. And I'm seeing from the Gitter that there was some issues that were brought up this week that don't seem to have been addressed. I don't know if anyone can comment on that.
Okay, weird question. Where are you pulling these numbers from? Because I can't find the list that you're looking at.
From the agenda. So on GitHub. And so 1283 was the one around net gas metering for S-Store that got removed from Constantinople. Then 1706 was the fix for Istanbul. And then on the last call, I believe Wei had proposed EIP 2200, but that might still be a PR and not a proper EIP yet, which was basically a combination of both. Let me post the PR in the chat. There you go. And if no one on the call has strong opinions, we can maybe move on and then have another call for it later on if people are looking at the pull request I just posted.
I guess one.
Go ahead.
One thing that I would ask is, does anyone oppose accepting some variation of this thing? Because from my perspective, the thing that we have to decide is whether we want to implement this feature. And then if we accept, we do want to implement this feature, and probably client developers will start hacking on it and there will be minor tweaks. But to be honest, probably the three EIPs are more or less the same thing. So technical variations aside, it's trying to do the same thing.
And that's the consensus we had on the last call. I think like feature wise, it seemed like people agreed, but the sort of documentation issue hadn't been worked out. And I believe Powell, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, had highlighted an issue about it last week. So I think that was the main remaining concern. So let me just get the link from the Gitter. So this is a link to the issues that were brought up. I don't know if anyone can speak to this.
Oh yeah. So sorry, this is Alexis. So now, I guess basically the whole thing was about in 2200 there was an extra bit which I think was migrated from another EIP that is now checking the remaining gas at the end of the opcode, is checking the remaining gas, and if the remaining gas is it more than 2000, is it less or more? Is it more? Is less than 2,300, then it basically fails. So which is basically something explicitly depending on gas left. And I think there was a bit of problem with that. So it might actually preclude certain optimizations. That's what I understood from Pavel. And so I was suggesting to make it, to restructure it in a different way, basically to charge, make a mandatory charge of 2,300 in the beginning of the opcode, so that it doesn't have a branching on the gas, the remaining gas, and then adjust all the other bits to refund a bit more. And somebody pointed out that it's not equivalent because of the refund limit, because the refunds are limited to the half of the spent gas and things like this. So yeah, I don't know where that conversation went. I don't really have a strong preferences either way, but just that was my suggestion.
So to come back to Peter's point around, do we want this feature and can people just hack on it, to get to something? Given that we're supposed to hard fork the test nets on, I think it was August 14th, so this is like 2.5, 3 weeks from now. Do we feel there's sufficient time to resolve those issues? Yeah.
Well, I think I'm missing something, but okay, this forking in 2 weeks, the testnets, that's kind of news to me, but does anyone, so given that we're talking about which EIPs to get expected, anyone here thinks that we're going to fork in 2 weeks?
Yeah, and to be clear, I took this number from the original roadmap we had for Istanbul. So I think August 14th was the date, and then the next, and then the upgrade was supposed to be right after DevCon. I don't have the date handy, but it was something like October 16th. And that was a point farther down the agenda, but obviously, yeah, it does have an impact if we have like the amount of time we have to implement these changes.
Well, to be honest, as long as we don't have a final list of EIPs, I don't see the point of agreeing on a date, simply because we have absolutely no idea how much work it would take. But I can promise you that this list won't be done in 2 weeks. That said,
is it time for a discussion about schedule?
Sorry?
Is it time to have a general discussion about schedule and whether we think our current schedule is achievable?
Yeah, maybe let's finish the EIPs first. I didn't want to diverge discussion.
Okay, so I guess if
yeah.
this EIP was independent of the hard fork schedule, is this something we agree that we want for Istanbul?
So this EIP is relatively simple. I mean, I haven't looked into the technical details, but the previous one that was canceled in the end, it's not a hard EIP to code. So it's maybe 50 lines of code. So I don't see any particular issue of excluding this just because of timing concerns. And I think it's a useful feature. So unless there's a technical reason to not accept it, I think we should go forward with some variation of this.
So we're still talking about 1283.
Yes.
So I think 1283 is implemented in most of the clients. But last call, we said that it should go together with 1706, which is the extra check for the calls with the stipend only. I don't think that's implemented anywhere, but that's where Pavel brought up his other option, which would introduce kind of a new semi-static mode. So the
Can you please link to the EIP, because I have no idea what the EIPs you guys are talking about.
So the comment from Pavel is the last last message from Tim on the chat.
Okay.
And that says that the calling a contract with a stipend only would disallow S-store and any other state modification except logs. This would be another option to solve the reentrancy issue discovered with 1283. Yeah, my question is maybe to Peter and others on the call. I do like this semi-static mode idea, but is it realistic to be implemented?
I'm still looking for the EIP.
It's a comment. It's not an EIP.
Well, this discussion that you refer to, that says EIP 1706 discussion. I have no idea what EIP 1706 is.
1706 was the, oh yeah. Oh, I see where you're confused. So yeah, it's the 1706 discussion. The 1706 is on the EIP's website. But Pavel's comment is just an alternative solution. And you don't need to know what 1706 does, because you can just handle the idea on its own.
So 1706, yeah, was just the part where they charge the 2300 check and fail the SS store. 2200 includes that entirely.
So is it worth moving on to something else, or do we want to wrap up this discussion? Or does everyone just need time to look into the different options?
So just to react, I mean, I haven't seen this semi-static thing up until now, or I somehow missed it. But personally, I don't really like the idea of introducing yet another internal state to the EVM that tracks whatever I mean, from my perspective, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot eventually with the more these behavioral subtleties we introduce. So if there's an alternative that can work around not having these special cases, then I would go with that.
Well, an alternative is to hide it behind the versioning flag. Only allow 1283 to be used on newly deployed code with the 1702. 1702 is the versioning EIP. That's a discussion later down. Which of these EIPs we have are subject to versioning and which ones are going to be under all versions of the EVM. That's actually one that's enumerated in 1706 is to use the versioning. But people felt that they wanted to have this available to previous existing dApp developers, and because we tried it on Constantinople, there was some feeling that we should try it at least in version 0.
Yeah, so honestly, I myself, I'm not a fan of versioned accounts, because that, again, it's just essentially we're going to have to maintain 2 EVMs. So that's a different discussion, but I would really like to not have special features for different versions as much as possible.
So this is more different accounting in different versions, not a special feature in different versions.
But if there's a way to solve it for uniformly for everybody, then why would we pick a solution that doesn't solve it for old accounts?
My comment on the versioning EIP, or whatever number it was, I sort of remember originally the reason why it came up. There was 2 reasons why it came up. First of all was the EIP 615, which was the static jump and other extensions to the EVM, which has now been withdrawn. And then another reason for that was the potential introduction into EWASM engine into the Ethereum 1.0, which is now also not very uncertain. It's probably not going to happen. So I would say that it actually, from my point of view, we sort of lost the appeal for, we lost the real initial reason why the account versioning was proposed. So
that's a discussion I want to have after we get some resolution on these EIPs. It was the number 2 on the discussion. And I kind of agree. If we don't have 615 or EVM, do we need versioning now or do we bring it in then? But do we want to table 1283 and discuss versioning, or do we want to get resolution on 1283 first?
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I just wanted to say that if there is a version of 1283 that can solve all the issues for all the accounts and doesn't require versioning and doesn't require behavioral changes to the EVM, I mean, adding extra subtle EVM modes, then I would just go with that. And then problem solved, self-contained EIP, done.
I think it's a trilemma. I don't think we can get all 3.
well, I think this is what the EIP 2200 does, right? It's basically the combination of the old one, the 1283 plus this extra fix for the stipend, and it doesn't introduce any extra EVM features. I think that's what it is.
So does it make?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Is that if this last version 2200 fixes it, then that seems like the correct choice to make, and it seems like a good thing to have in the next hard fork. So unless somebody can actually say a legitimate technical reason why 2200 shouldn't go in, I don't see a reason why it shouldn't go in.
So does anyone on this call have a technical reason? So I think at the very least, it makes sense to use 2200 as the sort of going forward point for discussions on this. So at last week's call, I think we were still spread out across all these different EIPs. Do we want to say 2200 is accepted, or do we still need to flesh out those technical details before we're comfortable accepting it?
I mean, I think it should be accepted, but I do understand that there are some de-optimizations that it introduces.
Does anyone oppose accepting 2200? Okay.
Yeah, at this point, we should just implement it and then have a discussion based on an existing implementation, whether it's meaningful or not.
Sounds good. And just to be 100% sure I understand, this is the equivalent of accepted, right?
I would say yes.
Okay, got it. I thought as well, but just wanted to make sure. Next one on the list was 1057 Prague POW. I'm not sure if everyone here saw, but there was a blog post about the audit that came out this week, basically saying that I think the audit should be done by the end of August. I'll post the blog post in the chat. Does anyone want to speak to Prague POW?
I'll go if no one else is interested. Is anyone else interested in saying a word or two about it?
Well, I guess it's just a question. I think the hard part in Prague POW is actually implementing it, but as far as I know, more or less every client already has implemented it. So I guess the discussion is whether we go ahead with it or not, and that probably depends on the result of the audit. So,
right, and I don't think the audit's going to come back without remediation recommendations. I do have a concern about the hash rate changing at the fork block and a potential chain stalling issue. And that's something that they're looking at. And I think the timing that the audit is coming back, I don't think we'll have enough time to fully digest or remediate it before we need to decide go, no go for a test net. In fact, according to the original schedule, the test net should have been launched. The test net putting these Istanbul changes should have been launched by the time the audit comes back. So for those reasons, I am not comfortable putting it in Istanbul. I'd much rather see something like this either in the next fork in April or on its own fork independently if other developers support it.
well, just to counter that, I guess if Prague POW is so, we can expect that there won't be changes made to the Prague POW algorithm. I mean, I don't know.
Assumption. We don't know what's going to come back from the audit.
Yes,
Might be minor suggestions.
What? So if we don't know what's going to come back from the audit, shouldn't we wait until we know what comes back from the audit?
And on that point, the auditor's least authority said they would come and present this audit on an all core devs call once it's done. But realistically, that'll be end of August, early September.
I also think due to like the political contentiousness of it, that having it in Istanbul would be a risk for Istanbul being adopted. I think the majority of people would prefer it to be its own separate fork.
And Peter, sorry, we kind of jumped in while you were talking. You were saying something as well?
No, so essentially what I wanted to say is that Prague POW is this really ultra separate EIP that could be pulled even at the last minute. So one alternative would be to consider it doable, and if the audit says basically, if the auditors come back and tell us that it's a no-go for whatever reason, then it's I think it should be really easy and simple to just tear it out, even at the last moment. So from this perspective, it's I think it's a bit of an easier EIP than all the other ones which mess with the EVM, because this one is just this standalone separate thing that doesn't touch consensus, doesn't touch anything, or I mean doesn't touch execution consensus.
But what is the last moment? Is it before the testnet launches, or is it before mainnet launches?
Well, my question is that previously, after the Byzantium hard fork, I don't know which, no, Constantinople. So that's where we had the issues. So I had the suggestion that instead of forking off the testnet, what we could do is create the so-called shadow fork, where we essentially we don't upgrade the testnet, rather we just create a side chain for the testnet. So we still propagate the same transactions, we just start executing with a new rule engine. This wouldn't be, well, I won't say that it wouldn't be public, it would be public, but clients wouldn't by default switch over to it. Rather, they could have a special flag that says, play around with this whatever testnet. And then you have the feedback that you can see if the clients agree between each other. You can test everything, but it's not live yet officially. So this chain would be discarded anyway, or could be discarded. But I don't know. I don't really want to figure out a new forking strategy at this point.
And we also haven't forked the test nets yet. So I mean, I agree with Peter that we should continue as the core devs have already said, which is accepted pending on the audit, given that technically pulling it out isn't that big of a thing. Then I don't think we need to say, hey, let's stop it today, when there actually isn't anything running to even stop it from being in.
Are we going to fork the testnet according to schedule, or are we going to move the schedule out? Because if we're not going to move the schedule out, it has been stated the audit will not come back before we have to commit the code to the testnet under the current forking strategy.
Well, the schedule is going to be a later part on this call. So far, we're just going through the EIPs.
Okay, so if it can be pulled out prior to a testnet, then consider it in.
Okay, and I think we might want to rediscuss this after the schedule, but for now, does anyone have any final comments on ProgPow? Okay, moving on, the last one was 1962. There was an update for it posted in the agenda. I'll share this on the chat. Oh.
I can summarize what has been done since last week, the discussion on the call and in the forums. So we integrated the C++ client into Geth. Now it compiles seamlessly. So developers have a choice whether they want to use Rust with some additional compilation or just use the C++ version, which is native. Then we started the fuzzy testing, and it's running for 6 days already now with 32 core. So it's like over half a year fuzzy testing running with 12 million operations per hour. And we indeed found 4 cases where the clients mismatched, but it was due to the Rust version not following the input specification precisely, which was corrected. No problems in the arithmetics itself were found. And finally, we have implemented a tiny library for conveniently calling the EIP, which is what you just referred to. You can take a look at the examples there. It's just a few lines of code to call the function. We have some further questions from the community, which we need to get answers to understand what's decided to do. So there is a concern that we should have multiple separate addresses for this precompile. We would like to understand to take some decision on this, and we can do either version. It's very easy to adopt. at the moment, the library hides all the complexity of having the first byte determining the operation. But if you guys decide that it's better to have separate addresses, we can easily switch to this. This is the first question. Second question is the current pace of fuzzy testing enough, or do we need to increase, add more hardware to support more than 32 parallel processes so that we can get to years of CPU time in testing? And yeah, the gas metering is in progress. So we have the gas metering functions are there. We just need to get the proper constants, and we want to collect more data for this. And then we will proceed to the state tests and implement the tests, which can be run by every client consistently. There was a concern about the specification. We wanted to prepare it for this call, but unfortunately, Alex, who's in charge of the precompile, got sick, so he needs a few more days to recover. Then we will do the second part. The first part was the specification for the input formats, which we already have, and the second part was for the what's actually happening, the formulas, which are very straightforward arithmetics. We just need to put the formulas there and put the gas metering constants in place, and then everybody can follow the instructions and implement this precompile directly from the specs. It's going to be a very straightforward process. It took us just 1 week to implement the C++ version, so I don't expect much difficulties there, but we're still happy to assist anybody. So yeah, to recap the questions, do we need separate addresses for operations, or can we keep one with this library? Increasing or not the fuzzy testing parallelism? Yeah, and that's it. These two questions.
Okay, so since everybody's silent, I myself am not familiar with the EIP apart from, okay, I saw it before, but that's kind of it. However, is there a particular reason why people were asking to have separate precompiles?
I think the main reason was the usability of calling the, it's more natural to call different precompiles for different operations, although they are using the same code under the hood. I think this is addressed by the library, because the library makes it very easy to call any elliptic curve, any operation. It packs all the parameters together with nice typing, with every entity like the point or a point pair having separate structure. So I think this is addressed by this, but if anybody disagrees, we can switch to also having different addresses.
So I've been the one asking for the 4 addresses. One of my big concerns is we have to read the byte stream and interpret the first byte, and based on that, branch on 4 different functions for the gas calculation. If we're doing 4 separate, not just constants, but I mean straight up different formulas for calculating the gas. This sounds like something that should be split up into at least 4, and because there's a G2, G3 separation, 7 methods to calculate the gas, so we don't have to basically run the library program to calculate the gas. If we keep the gas function where there's, the 7 main branches get 7 main functions. The second thing, this also matches the design pattern of what went on with the EC, with the ALPN 128 functions. There's an add, a multiply, and a pairing check. This library adds an exponentiation step, and it's also for G1 and G2. So it also follow what we've been doing with our other precompiles, where there is basically one function and not one giant function hiding 7 different functions with 4 different gas calculation formulas. I think it would be a better reflection of the true complexity of what's going on here. I think parameterizing the particular curves is fine, but I think the operation should match existing pattern we have with ALPN 1.
I actually now just thought about it. I also think that from the point of view of I know not lots of people read the bytecode, the EVM bytecode, but some people do. And when you read the bytecode and you see the precompile calls, usually that basically you put the address of the caller the precompile onto the stack, and you do another 6 things in the stack, and then you do the call. And usually, if you know what you're calling, you can actually see from the bytecode that what you're actually calling. However, if you encode the function as the first byte of the parameter, then it actually ends up in memory somewhere, and it might not be obvious where it is. So I guess from the EVM bytecode readability, it will be easier to identify which precompile you're calling, and it might not also be easier from a static analysis point of view. But as I said, that not many people read the bytecode. Sometimes I do, but it's.
Okay, so we can switch to this. Does anybody disagree with switching to having separate addresses for the operations? Well, then it seems that there is a consensus, so we will just change the code to this. Then the second question is, do we need to increase parallelism, or do you guys think it will be enough to have 32 parallel processes for the remaining time?
Until we have an implementation that's written by an independent author, the fuzz testing is good, but we won't get the real value until we have the independent implementation in the fuzzing.
Yeah, so here would be nice if Martin could weigh in, or Guido, or anyone who has been fuzzing, because from my perspective, I can't meaningfully say anything.
So if everybody is silent, I assume we can continue for like this for now. Like if somebody has a concern that this is not enough, please just post it to the forum or the chat, and then we can increase. In my opinion, 32 is fine, because we're going to run it for several months, and it's going to be overall years of CPU runtime, which with 12 million operations per hour should be fine.
Thanks, Alex. And again, just for clarity, are we saying we want this accepted for Istanbul and to start working on independent implementations? Or phrase it another way, does anyone oppose having this accepted and starting to work on client implementations?
Istanbul at work. So if you guys want to fork anything in 2 weeks, then I can guarantee that this won't make it. So at this point, if anyone wants to create an alternative implementation.
So we already have 2 different implementations in different languages. One was created in 1 week. So if somebody wants to create it in different language, we can assist and even help with resources. So the question is whether anybody wants to do it at all, because the formulas are just direct, like it's purely functional. There is no state. The complexity is actually much lower than lower complexity functions with state by orders of magnitude. So it's people can just use what we have with a choice of Rust or C++. But if somebody wants to implement a separate version, then it's perfectly doable now, if at all there is such a desire. And we should simply define a criteria of whether, like for this precompile, which is a very long awaited precompile from I think 2 years from now, maybe less, but like I think since the first one was like BN256 is like 1.5 years, right? So and this is the final one. We won't need any update on this until we have a like fully flexible WASM implementation because it covers all the cases. People who want to do anything with elliptic curves will be able to do it. If we find a new curve, people can use it and so on. So if we want this at all in Ethereum ever, we should just define criteria and say, okay, when this is fulfilled, then we can include it. If we don't define the criteria now, then I mean, if the criteria is never going to be fulfilled, then it will never make it into Ethereum, and it's going to be a pity because people really need this. If we can define criteria now, then we can see, okay, can we fulfill them for this hard fork?
So there's a criteria the Beacon chain is using for their launch, and that is 2 independent author implementations fully compatible with the Beacon chain. So I think that's one criteria that should be added, is that there should be an implementation independently. I'm willing to do that, but I agree with Peter. The deadline, if we're going to fork per the schedule, is where the risk is. I mean, the EIPs are supposed to be finished in May, not continue to be haggled through halfway through July. So that's one of the issues we're having with the schedule, is that if we had these details of where the EIP was at in May, it would have been easier to get that independent implementation done before the fork.
Well, you know, I would say this. So basically, after this process of weeding out, I'm pretty sure that most of the EIPs now are going to be dropped out. And if we say that this is, if we're going to stick to the schedule, then it looks like, for example, this EIP might not make it. Okay, that's fine. But we basically are going to end up with maybe like 3 or 4 very simple EIPs to implement. And that's fine if we want to do that. So just to keep up to the schedule. But that also means that if these things are pretty simple, then I would also propose that to do another upgrade, maybe shortly after that one, with the more substantial features, because basically the Istanbul is going to be pretty much chain ID, the little bit of gas reduction, and what's something else. That was it. What was the other thing? So that would be like 3 things, right? So, but for me now, the one, this precompile is actually one of the main features of the next, well, of the next functional release. So yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of agree there that just for the net gas metering and for chain ID, I don't see a reason to hard fork, because it's just a huge coordination, and I mean, I don't see the value of it. But from my perspective, I'm perfectly fine if we decide that we want to have, I don't know, ProgPow and this one in, and we're going to push the fork up until the point where these 2 get in. I think that, from my perspective, that is acceptable.
There's also intrinsic gas cost reductions and Blake 2B that was missed in that list.
So there was only a single more EIP that someone wanted to discuss, which was 1884. And I think, Alex, you asked if Martin had thoughts on that, and he's not on the call. So it might make sense to just move to the schedule discussion now, because we've been kind of hinting at it across every single EIP. Does that make sense?
Let's do schedule.
So yeah, like Alexei was saying, right now, the accepted EIPs we have for Istanbul are the chain ID, opcodes, the net gas metering, and then the alt BN precompile, as well as Blake 2B and account versioning.
No, there's also this 2028, which is the intrinsic gas reduction. Yes, I forgot about that one.
Did we accept account versioning?
About a month ago, yes.
Yeah, but so that discussion was that there's absolutely no point in it because nothing's going to use it.
Yeah, I think I would suggest to actually retract it, because I don't see the point of doing account versioning, to be honest, anymore.
So if something's going to use it, then sure, but if we're going to introduce account versions and we absolutely have 0 use cases for it, then that seems like a dangerous path.
I agree with that. That was one of the things that's on the agenda right before the schedule, I think, is which EIPs go on the new V1 for account versioning and which ones don't. And you're right, it was brought in for 615. It was brought in for EWASM. And since those have been pushed strongly out of Istanbul, the authors are like giving up on it because of funding and political issues. But I still think they're valuable, and I still think they want to come back. But 1702 was really the enabler for that. And if we don't have any need for it, then let's just keep everything on one version. I do think that makes sense.
It has been suggested to use versioning 1702 for the particle gas cost reductions that we'd like to do in the particle gas costs 20 EIP 2045.
For the 1702, there's one thing. I think at this moment we don't, like, all of our EIPs are pretty simple. But the thing is, I would still propose that that we include the account versioning in testing, because that would be a really, that would provide a stable ground, because there are other ifs depending on that. For example, the state-run EIPs, and also if we want to like do some other stuff, like I also have some other ideas that have EIPs depending on account versioning. So if we can have a really stable ground for how the account versioning actually works, I think that would be a good thing.
So wait, I don't think that the state versioning, state rent EIPs actually depend on account versioning. They actually they conflict, some of it with conflicting with it. So which means that they are basically have to be kind of made in sequence sort of way, but they're not depending on account versioning.
Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't like I would pretty opposed if we deploy the state run, like the additional account items without account versioning, because in that way it would be quite a mess for the account RLPs. So yeah.
My concern against this, basically with the account versioning, is that that seems like an abstraction that we want to add to, so that later we can build stuff on top of it, but we don't have yet the stuff that we want to build on top of it. And my concern is that we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot by deploying an account versioning that later may turn out to be not perfectly suitable for whatever use cases. That's why I personally would say that account versioning should go in when we actually have a use case for it.
Yeah, but like what I'm saying is that I think it's a good thing if all clients can implement it at this moment. So it would be like a lot easier for other features to build on top of account versioning. Like if we only, like if we don't include it in testing, then it's kind of like, because it's a big feature, like it kind of like pushed into the future, and then those features, depending on conversion, will be like quite hard to implement for any hardware.
So I think I got another suggestion on this line, and then also I've put it in the agenda two times in a row for the meetings, but we never managed to get to it. So it's called the preemptive refactoring. But yeah, so I understand what you're talking about, but maybe if we get to this point, we can discuss there. But yeah.
Yeah, these past calls we haven't gotten through a lot on the agenda. So in that spirit, maybe just to bring back the conversation around the roadmap, which we wanted to discuss, it seems there's like three big things that might benefit from extra time on the roadmap. So 1962, which we just discussed, Prague PAL, because the audit will be due late August. So realistically, mid-September, everyone will have wrapped their heads around the audit. And then the third one, I know Alexei, we've discussed your EIPs, and you've mentioned before that you might not be ready for the actual Istanbul deadlines. So I guess there's two sides to this. One is how much extra time would we need if we wanted to take on these more ambitious changes? And second, how do we make sure that if we extend the deadline, we're not in the same position 2 months from now because we got sort of a whole other barrage of EIPs to go through?
If we delay, we don't accept any more EIPs. If you're not on the list to come on, I don't think we should allow any more open calls for EIPs. That's going to be the next time that the community open call happens. My thought is we have two realistic options. That's to delay 1 month or to delay 3 months, because we don't want to be trying to do the hard fork over Christmas. That's not an ideal situation.
Or another option is to not delay and just basically do what we already have, and then try to do whatever we can to that timeline we had, and then see, because it's, again, I mean, this is another experiment we're trying to do here, and maybe we can do another hard fork shortly after that, because we discussed in the past that we kind of wanted to be, I mean, a lot of people wanted to make it the hard forks which are more meaningful, but also potentially as soon as something is ready and then at a high quality and is really in demand, why not put it in?
Also, just want to say from client implementations perspective, I think we will be really in favor of having simple hard forks than complex ones. It's just simpler to test and harder to make some mistakes and then mess things up.
So one idea we discussed at Pegasus, so I'm kind of stepping out of the facilitator role here, is having the hard fork as scheduled, then potentially having another hard fork in January, which would include whatever was too big / too ambitious / too contentious for Istanbul. And in parallel, trying to start organizing another sort of public hard fork for April. So you would have, or maybe it could be later than April, but basically that we'd have Istanbul as on schedule, whatever was too big for Istanbul, in another hard fork shortly after, and then a bit after that to have another hard fork that's open for new EIP submissions, which would basically happen in parallel to this Istanbul plus hard fork.
Does that mean we have a hard fork coming up after, like, if according to your plan, that means we have a hard fork coming up after Istanbul, that is only like 2 or 3 months after Istanbul. So like, I think that's quite a short time, and I just worry that we don't have enough time to, like, because some release some clients may need like a month in advance for the release, and then we still need a lot of time to inform the community and to get all the miners exchanges on the same page. So I just think that might be a little short.
Yeah,
and we also need a lot of time for testing.
I think the idea was that that, for example, we can take the list that we currently have and schedule and make it into 2 hard forks. Essentially, everything that's simple and that can be finished really fast, and essentially we have everything that's accepted up until now goes into that category. That one can probably be implemented fast, and then we can start this whole procedure of testing it and rolling it out, etc. But concurrently, we can already start working on the second part of that list, on say ProgPow or the crypto stuff. That's so essentially we don't have to wait until the Istanbul hard fork passes to start working on the heavy PRs. So that would be the, I guess, the advantage of this approach, where we have this Istanbul is the open PR where anyone could suggest anything, and then we have this follow-up PR, which is just hand-picked heavy modifications, where the teams can actually focus on those 2 or 3 EIPs which are really heavy, and it's not opened up to the public. And in the meantime, yes, concurrently, we can already start planning for the next public thing to get extra stuff in. So I guess we can do these forks on 2 threads. That was the suggestion. Yeah, of course. Sorry, I did not want to interrupt you.
And here's an idea. Let's keep the opening dates the same and just move the actual hard fork out for July.
Oh, so you would open them the same time as you would have opened the April one. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because I think we're going to need the time to sift through all the entries.
So does anyone disagree with this from a schedule perspective, to break Istanbul out into 2 parts, have our agreed upon schedule, which implies we fork a testnet in 2 weeks or 3 weeks time, and then we have the extra, we'll obviously need some dates for the extra forks, but the mainnet upgrades would happen in January and July.
So I'm still convinced that you cannot fork the testnet in 2 weeks' time.
Okay.
Because there are EIPs to be implemented. Those need to be implemented. Those need to be somewhat tested, because people still rely on the testnet, so you can't just blow it up. And after it's implemented and semi-tested, or it seems to be solid, then clients need to do the releases. People need to upgrade to that testnet people, otherwise the testnet's going to fall apart and become unusable. You need, I would say, after everything, all the IPs are implemented, they seem to be working okay. Cross-client mini testnets also work. At that point, if clients do the release, I would say you still need 2 weeks to convince people to upgrade. Anything shorter is not really realistic. It's just going to be chaos.
I like the idea in general, but from like client implementations perspective, I just think the January date is a little bit short because it's only like 2 or 3 months after the October, the first one, October one. So if we move that a little bit further, like to February, I think that would be a little better.
So I think the original idea was that we actually tried to implement these bigger EIPs on the scheduled date for original Istanbul, October, and only if we see that it's not enough time, like by a few weeks, then we can prove them over to this second part. But we actually have a chance to also get them in October.
I no. So you can't skip. You can't split. So if you fork the testnet, then you need to stick to that. So okay. You can't fork the testnet with half the EIPs and then do a big fork with extra EIPs.
Mm-hmm.
And Wait, to come back to your point, you're saying January is too early, even if we're just doing these extra Istanbul EAPs, correct?
Like my point is, like after is too short because we do 2 hard work in a row, which is too short to each other, because clients will need to like make releases and we need to inform other people, even if we get the test nets right.
Can somebody summarize the bigger EAPs which will go in the second part?
ProgPow, EC Mole, and what was the third one? Let's do them up.
Potentially some of the state rent EIPs.
Yes, so far I think we got potentially one of the state rent EIPs, and then there was, if we don't have time to do the precompile, that will be precompile. And what's the other one? I don't actually.
ProgPow.
Oh yeah, ProgPow.
And coming back to your point, Peter, around the 2 weeks not being realistic no matter what, if we push that out 1 month, so instead of mid-August, mid-September, and then the hard fork instead of mid-October, mid-November, does anyone feel, and then also have a hard fork potentially in February, which is, you know, still like a 3-4 months. Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to see if we do push out Istanbul 1 month, because anyway, like there's no way we get it out in 2 weeks. What does the schedule look like?
Well, will we be able to include all the big EIPs? Like what's on the other ones except EIP 1962? Will 1 month be enough to actually? Maybe, yeah.
No, so I think what Peter was saying is that with 1 month we could probably, but the current timeline for Istanbul is not realistic, even if it's only the simple EIPs. So therefore we need to push it back anyways.
Well, my concern is not with Istanbul, rather with the testnet. So the Istanbul fork for testnets.
So you're saying you would be comfortable keeping the October date of mid-October, but perhaps pushing the testnet date?
Yeah, so for example, I think the shortest thing, if you want to really push Istanbul, and I would say if we pick late August, like end of August, beginning of September, I don't know, 1st of September, I just set a date as the hard fork for Istanbul for the testnets for Opston. Then depending on the EIPs, if the EIPs are implementable within 1 or 2 weeks, then that's realistic that we can do a release within 2 weeks, and then everybody upgrade within 2 weeks. And if we keep this timeline, then I don't think we need to push the mainnet Istanbul further, because I mean,
so September 4th is basically the middle of the week of the first week of September. Would it make sense to agree to that for our Istanbul testnet? Then keep what we had was, I believe, October 16th as Istanbul mainnet. And I don't know what the next fork looks like, but maybe keep in our back pocket the idea around potentially having a January/February fork along with one later in 2020 where we accept new EAPs. Does that make sense?
well, I think at this point, I would say that we should either decide. So if we want, so I guess this crypto EIP is legitimately useful. So if ideally we want to get that in, then option A is to do 2 hard forks, one of them fast, so to say, and the other one soonish enough afterwards. And if we go down that path, then we should probably already now decide that we want to do the second hard fork. We want to do it, I don't know, in January, and we want that EIP in so people can work on it already. Or if we don't want to do hard forks, then I would push the main Istanbul a bit so that there's a chance to get it into the original Istanbul. So if we think that this EIP is worthy to be included, then I would figure it out now how to include it.
So there's a meta discussion, I think, as to how we want to handle our network upgrades or forks going forward. Do we want regular predictable forks, or do we want to have forks where we get, what we think the demand is? Are we going to fix the date, or are we going to fix the features? The advantage of fixing the date is we can do them more regularly. We can do them 2 to 3 times a year. But the downside is we have to be harsh when things get close to the end and things aren't ready. We have to look at EIP and say, great idea, you're going on the next train. You're not going on this train. So that's kind of, the moment of truth. Which model do we want to adopt? Obviously, I'm an advocate of the scheduled next train approach, but I don't know if there's enough consensus around that to commit to it.
So just want to propose an idea. I actually submitted EIP like several weeks or months ago. The 2123. Which is basically change our hard fork scheduling to a signaling based version. I think in that case we wouldn't need to have this discussion today. Like if we do any signaling based of hard fork, we would. And implementing whatever features when they are ready, and then they deploy it to exchanges and miners, and then the hard fork can be automatically logged in whenever enough of the network have upgraded their client version. So in that case, it will be less of like more convenient for developers.
We'd still have to come to consensus as to when to fire that contract. We need to have some governance around who has the keys to update the numbers on that contract.
So because there's, I guess, clearly a lot of discussion to be had, and that we have another call next week, and that a lot of people are not on this call, it might be worth punting the discussion around the schedule to the next call, but perhaps just agreeing to move the testnet date for Istanbul, because no matter what, we will have to do that. So would anyone disagree with just moving the testnet date to Istanbul and to September 4th, sorry, and then having a follow-up conversation around the hard fork schedule we want past that?
So I think a good way forward, so the problem is that if we just say that, okay, let's discuss it next week, then we're going to be in the exact same position next week, just with 1 more week lost. So in my opinion, the hard forking the testnet within 2 weeks, it's not going to happen. So we need to push that. So what we could do is say that, okay, we will fork Istanbul on Rockstan on the 4th of September. And for this fork, we surely know that we have a list of EIPs, which we should list now so that all the client developers know that we want these in. And let's try to target that fork today already so that client developers know what's happening and they can seriously consider coding the whole thing. And then after this, we can also say that beside these 5 EIPs that are surely going in, here's 3 more that you should start working on seriously. and then next week we can discuss where people are at.
I like it.
Sounds good.
Okay, and just for clarity, so hard forking at the testnet on the 4th. What is the list of EIPs we want, as a must-have, and what are the other ones that we want to seriously start working on?
I think we should have the list be finalized next call, so that gives an opportunity for people who are on this call to have their input.
But I think we should get a preliminary list now.
Yes,
Yeah, I think we have a preliminary list already. I don't want to say this is it without having at least a little bit of time for we've changed how we're going to do things and give the community a chance to give feedback that is unanticipated.
Okay, but we do have, I think it was a list of 5 EIPs that seems that we will surely accept, and there were, I don't know, 2 more EIPs that would be really awesome to have, but they either might require some extra input from the auditors, or they might require some extra work that's not enough time. But I think we should have this list that, unless somebody starts yelling really, really loudly, that's what we're going to go with.
So looking at the PR you put up, James, and my notes from this call that just happened right now, what seems to be the list of stuff that's going in and that's been accepted is 1108, 1702, 2024, 2028, and then 1344 was added on this call. And then on this call, the ones that seem to be tentatively accepted, i.e. start working on them and we'll figure out if we can put them in, seem to be 2200, 1962, Prague PAL, which I forget,
1057.
1057.
Could we have a written list somewhere?
So there's going to be notes. There's going to be notes from this call. So that's why I'm trying to enumerate them to make it easy for whoever is taking the notes. I'll share them in all core devs.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
And we can update the fork lists, the 1679 to have a list of the yeses and then the tentative yeses, and the tentative yeses can be this more list of ones we want but need further work.
Exactly. And so right now, just to wrap this up, aside from 2200, 1962, and 1057, is there anything else we want on this list?
I think we should move 1702 account versioning into the next fork, maybe, because I think we come to a consensus. Nothing in this list requires it.
Yeah. I mean, it at this point, the conversioning doesn't matter for the mainnet at this moment. But I still want to propose we include it in the testing at the earliest possible date, which might still be the first Istanbul hard fork, because at this moment we have 3 client implementations, draft implementations, which I just think it would be really good. It doesn't affect mainnet, but I think it's a really good thing to have if we can include it in the Istanbul testing.
As I said,
okay,
I
let's
think
put a star on it.
We could actually do something, as I said, the preemptive refactoring instead, so that in the future, if you needed to do the CIP, it will be super simple, because a lot of complexity is now actually in the refactoring.
Yeah, but if you do the refactoring, it's just implementing like EIP, right? It's the same thing.
But we don't have any. We don't have any EIPs targeting version 1 and not version 0 is the big issue right now.
Yeah, so it doesn't so even if we say now we implement the conversion, it doesn't really affect the mainnet because we don't have version 1 and version 0 is backward compatible.
So I guess the reason why I'm reluctant to go down this path is because we have this EIP that we figured out we needed. In the end, it turned out that we don't need it, and I'm questioning the viability of it. So why do we need it at all in the future?
I mean, that's actually the exact point why I'm pushing it for review, because I really like urge anyone who still think like that to like try to give some more comments and reviews on the EIP, because like I really hope that we have a stable foundation for like the current description of EIP 7002 is really like the bare minimum, like the absolute bare minimum you need to implement account versioning. And I just think it would be really great if we can have this, so that we have a really stable foundation about whenever we need a conversioning, we can have this foundation so that other EIPs can build things easily on top of that.
Unless there's reference tests against it, testing some form of it, I don't know that we'll be able to validate our refactoring amongst all the various clients as compatible.
I think we are working on some reference tests at this moment. So yeah, I just hope all the clients can take a look and do some review and include it in your Istanbul testing.
Okay, so can we table this and finish the discussion online and during the next call about where 1702 lands?
Yeah,
sure.
Just because we only have 5 minutes left on this call, is there anything that's missing from this list we have of what we'd like client implementers to prioritize for the testnet upgrade? Okay.
Where's the one to increase the cost of S load? I forget the number.
That's 2200. So that's fallen in the sort of tentative, let's try and get it in column, but it's not fully accepted yet because of some.
No, that's not. Sorry, that's not 2200. This is the other.
1884.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
The one I asked to discuss.
Oh yeah, so for that one, we kind of got in the schedule discussion instead. Do we want to discuss it now?
Technically, it's just price changes. The technical issues, I don't think, are the big ones. Oh, there is a new opcode, self-balance. Ooh, that's, yeah, maybe not. It suddenly became more technical.
If we don't I wasn't in the call for the net gas metering discussion, but if we don't need 80, like if we apply 8084 after net gas metering, then we can just use our number, the 1238 and 7006. We don't don't need the 2200.
Just to be mindful of time, let's just park that discussion until after 1884. So do we want to include 1884 in either the sort of tentative list or the in either side?
I don't think we ever got to discuss it, to be honest. So it's, I would say yes, but we never really we never got to that far.
Maybe we have that be the first item on next call.
Yeah, so this is, I guess, Martin's EIP, and he's not here. I can say just a couple words of it, just food for thought for next week. The idea is that Martin did a lot of benchmarks on, essentially he was measuring how much time individual opcodes take in the Get implantation compared to their price. And then he picked out that there are a few opcodes which, compared to the other ones, are really cheap gas-wise, but take computationally more than the others. And then he just tried to balance it out so that one gas approximately requires the same computing resources, whether that's subtraction or whether that's data retrieval. And this is essentially a trivial EIP. So unless there's somebody has a reason not to do it, I think we could do it. But I agree that let's postpone discussing or accepting it when Martin is here next week. But the EIP itself is probably 5 lines of code, so it's
no, I think it has self-balance opcode, right? So that's a new opcode.
Okay, so yeah, let's add that as the first agenda item for next call and have people review it in the meantime. Because we have a final minute, does anyone have anything they want to bring up that they feel hasn't been addressed that can be resolved quickly?
Can you state the final list of accepted and then the final list of tentatively accepted?
Yes.
EIP?
Please also state the title of the EIP because the numbers don't mean
Okay,
much.
got it. So for the testnet hard fork on September 4th, the list of accepted EIPs are, and I'm trying to pull out James PR here because the titles are in it. 1108 was the first one, which is reduce alt BN 128 precompiled gas costs. 2024/152 was Blake 2B. 2028 is call data gas cost reduction. And 1344 is the chain ID opcode. The one that was contentious is 1702, the account versioning. So we're not sure where that one fits. It's currently unaccepted, but might move to the other side or might get dropped. So we still need to have that conversation. On the tentatively accepted side, the EIPs are 2200, which is the combined 1283 plus 1706 around S-Store, which got the one that got pulled out of Constantinople. 1962, this is the precompile we discussed on the call today. Let me try to get the name. 1962. I can't find the name for this one.
Elliptic curve operations.
Elliptic curve operations, thank you. 10.15.7, which is Prague POW. And so just a, and then yeah, 1702, we're account versioning, we're not sure where that ends up. So we have four.
Also, please add this last one.
1884. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 1884 is in our tentatively accepted column as well.
I have 2 comments, probably as agenda items for the next call for this list.
Yeah.
The first one is for Blake 2. Probably 2 weeks ago, there was an issue raised by one of the people close to Blake 2, I believe, or at Zcash. And that hasn't been addressed yet. So I'm not sure if Blake 2 is going to be finalized within the time frames. So probably this is a good topic to discuss next call. And the other question I have is regarding the 1962. 1962 states that it depends on a gas cost reduction to precompiles because some of the, I believe the reasoning is that some of the operations are so cheap that the call cost itself would be bigger than the cost of the operation, and that would be a big drawback. And the question is it still a requirement? And if it is, then what happens if none of the precompile call reduction EIPs are accepted?
It's not a requirement because it's mostly for the heavy, like the greatest benefit comes from the heavy operations like pairings. So it makes sense to include it in any case, regardless of whether the other EIP is true.
Could you update the 1962 EIP to make this clear? Because
sure.
Currently it states that it requires the reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a note for the community, this is the last week for an EIP to get on either one of those lists, on the accepted or the tentatively accepted.
Great, we're a bit over, but is there anything else anyone wants to bring up urgently? Okay, and I think one important thing also that a lot of people have mentioned we want to discuss and still have never gotten to is just like conformance testing and initiatives around retested and stuff like that. So it might be worth having that discussion on the next call as well.
Sorry, can you clarify if this week or next week is the last opportunity to get on the tentatively accepted list?
Next Friday.
Next Friday, okay.
And
yeah, I think there's still a couple lurking that even if they don't make it into, in October, it'd be good to target them for January. And it wasn't clear if the target for January would only come from the tentatively accepted list or from a broader list.
Yeah, I think
I would.
Oh, go ahead, Peter.
No, I just wanted to answer that. I would say that if we go down the path of doing a double fork, I mean splitting out some EIPs because we want them in, but they are too heavy or they need a bit more work, then I would say that for that second fork, whatever is not on this list won't make it for that list, because otherwise we just end up in the same situation where we have all these tiny stuff that we discussed and the other ones.
Agreed. So basically, if anything that's already been proposed for Istanbul that has not been accepted or tentatively accepted yet, next Friday is the last deadline to potentially be included. But we're not looking at brand new EIPs. And a note about next Friday's call. So we have a weird rotation schedule, but next Friday's call will be at 10 p.m. UTC, which is middle of the night, Americas, and I think morning Europe, and I forget where for Australia. So it'll be 10 p.m. UTC on the Thursday. So this means Friday morning in Europe and the night of Thursday to Friday in America. No, Daniel has a comment in the chat. It'll be next Friday because this call was kind of a one we added just because there was too much stuff to discuss last time around, but we're not moving everything back 1 week. So there is also a call next Friday.
Okay, thank you.
One last comment. We said we tentatively accepted 1962, which is the EC arithmetic, and that states that it supersedes 1829, which was also proposed and has maybe a smaller feature set. Can we just agree that 1829 is rejected because we said the 1962, which is the superset, is tentatively accepted?
Does anyone disagree?
If we need that formal step, sure. All the lists I've seen have always combined 1962 and 1829, considering them to be one thing. So to formally say 1829 is out of the forks, I think is fine.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you all next Friday.
Thank you very much. And then client developers start coding everything.
Yes, basically.
Thanks, Tim. Nice facilitating.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Have a nice weekend.